Think you're tough enough for real combat, sweetheart? Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood's voice sliced through the crisp morning air at Camp Steelridge as his clenched fist collided with Corporal Emma Rodriguez's jaw during advanced combat training. The sickening crack of bone meeting flesh echoed across the rocky Colorado training grounds like a gunshot, reverberating off the surrounding mountain peaks as she crumpled to the hard-packed earth, crimson blood immediately streaming from her split lip onto the dusty ground below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Stay down where you belong, Blackwood sneered, his polished combat boots positioned mere inches from her face, as the other 34 recruits of Bravo Squadron watched in horrified silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, fear, and uncomfortable recognition that they were witnessing something that had crossed far beyond the boundaries of acceptable military training. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for what appeared to be a routine drill instructor asserting dominance over an insubordinate recruit. But what Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood didn't know what his arrogance and 15 years of unchecked authority had blinded him to was that within exactly 8 minutes, 4 full colonels would come racing across Camp Steelridge in unmarked vehicles, their emergency lights flashing, and his decorated military career would be obliterated before the Colorado sun reached its midday peak. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about military hierarchy and hidden identities, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community. And if this story grabs your attention the way it grabbed ours when we first uncovered these classified details, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because tomorrow we've got an even more explosive military story that involves a Navy SEAL, a crooked admiral, and a scandal that reached all the way to the Pentagon. Corporal Emma Rodriguez lay motionless on the unforgiving Colorado ground for exactly 4 seconds. Her athletic frame sprawled in the reddish dirt, shoulder-length black hair spilling from beneath her regulation combat helmet like dark silk against the harsh military landscape. To everyone observing this brutal scene, the shocked recruits, the uncomfortable training staff, the few base personnel who happened to be passing by, she appeared to be nothing more than another overconfident soldier who had finally encountered a reality check she couldn't handle. Autumn morning air at Camp Steelridge carried the bite of approaching winter, with temperatures hovering just above freezing and a thin layer of frost still clinging to the equipment scattered around Training Sector Delta. The facility, nestled in a valley between 2 imposing mountain ranges, had been conducting its weekly advanced combat readiness assessment when the confrontation erupted with explosive suddenness. 43 personnel stood in regulation formation, their breath creating small clouds in the crisp air, their faces now reflecting the collective trauma of witnessing what appeared to be excessive force during what should have been controlled training exercise. Master Sergeant Blackwood towered over the fallen soldier with the satisfaction of a predator that had successfully established dominance over its territory. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with arms like steel cables and a perpetually scowling face that had intimidated thousands of recruits over his career, he had built his fearsome reputation on breaking soldiers who thought they possessed more capability than they actually demonstrated under pressure. For 5 consecutive years, he had served as the primary advanced combat instructor at Camp Steelridge's elite mountain warfare training program, and his methods had become legendary throughout the Colorado military community for their unforgiving brutality and psychological intensity. The other drill instructors had dubbed him the Avalanche because he believed every training problem required overwhelming force to crush resistance before it could take root and spread through the ranks. His philosophy was simple: better to break a soldier's spirit during training than to have that soldier break under enemy fire when lives depended on their performance. It was a philosophy that had produced some of the military's finest mountain warfare specialists, but it had also left a trail of psychological casualties that the military preferred not to discuss in official reports. That's what happens when little girls think they can play soldier in a man's army. Blackwood announced to the formation, his voice dripping with contempt and professional satisfaction. Maybe your college degree and your daddy's political connections got you through basic training, Rodriguez, but out here in the real mountains, where the air is thin and the enemy doesn't care about your feelings, we separate the genuine warriors from the pretenders who think military service is some kind of adventure camp. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably in their positions, instinctively recognizing that they were witnessing something that had evolved far beyond tough military training into what could only be described as deliberate abuse of authority. The line between challenging instruction, designed to forge capable soldiers, and personal cruelty designed to satisfy ego had been crossed so definitively that even the most inexperienced personnel could sense the wrongness saturating the morning air, but none of them dared to speak up against a master sergeant whose reputation extended far beyond Camp Steelridge, whose connections throughout the military hierarchy made him seem virtually untouchable, and whose capacity for vindictive retaliation against anyone who questioned his methods had been demonstrated repeatedly over his long career. What none of these observers could see, what the morning shadows and carefully positioned equipment concealed from casual observation, was the small, sophisticated device clipped discreetly to Rodriguez's utility belt, now pulsing with an urgent red warning light that had activated the instant Blackwood's fist made contact with her face. The device, barely visible beneath her tactical gear and appearing to be nothing more than standard military communication equipment, was actually a highly classified monitoring system connected to security networks that operated at classification levels far above anything found at a standard Army training facility 3 miles away. In the heavily secured communication center of Camp Steelridge's command headquarters, priority alerts were beginning to flash across multiple computer screens simultaneously, triggering emergency protocols that hadn't been activated in over 2 years. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Corporal Emma Rodriguez remained perfectly still against the cold Colorado ground, her slender frame appearing fragile and defeated in the harsh morning light that filtered through the mountain peaks surrounding Camp Steelridge. To every observer present at Training Sector Delta, she embodied the image of a soldier who had finally encountered a challenge that exceeded her capabilities. Another ambitious recruit whose confidence had been shattered by the unforgiving reality of advanced military training. Crystalline mountain air carried the scent of pine and frost as the sun climbed higher over the rugged terrain, casting long shadows across the training facility where Delta Company had assembled for their weekly advanced combat assessment. 43 soldiers stood in precise formation on the hard-packed earth, their regulation uniforms crisp despite the early hour, their faces now reflecting the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the group like a heavy blanket after witnessing what appeared to be excessive disciplinary action. Emma lay motionless. For those crucial seconds, dark hair spilled across the rocky ground, blood trickling steadily from her split lip and creating small dark spots in the dust beneath her face. Her breathing appeared shallow and uneven, her eyes closed as if struggling to process the shock of Master Sergeant Blackwood's unexpected violence. Every visible detail suggested a young soldier overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her preparation or experience. the training ground itself, told a story of routine military preparation suddenly disrupted by unexpected brutality. Equipment stations were arranged in geometric precision across the sector, climbing gear, tactical communications devices, mountain warfare simulation tools, all positioned according to regulations that emphasized order and predictability. The morning schedule had called for standard advanced combat exercises, the kind of challenging but controlled training that prepared soldiers for mountain deployment scenarios. Weather conditions were typical for late autumn in the Colorado Rockies, with temperatures hovering just above freezing and a crisp clarity to the air that made every sound carry with unusual sharpness across the training facility. The American flag at the sector's center hung motionless in the still air, its red, white, and blue colors standing out starkly against the pale morning sky and the imposing mountain backdrop that surrounded Camp Steelridge on all sides. Private Marcus Chun, standing in the formation's front row, later described the scene as surreal and deeply disturbing. Rodriguez had always been one of our strongest performers, he recalled during subsequent interviews. Seeing her just lying there, bleeding, looking so helpless, it didn't match anything we knew about her capabilities. But at that moment, she looked exactly like what Sergeant Blackwood said she was. Someone who had been playing at being a soldier until reality finally caught up with her. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably in their positions, maintaining military bearing while internally processing the shock of witnessing their drill instructor's loss of control. Several had trained alongside Rodriguez for months, observing her consistent excellence in every training category. But the image of her crumpled on the ground seemed to contradict everything they thought they knew about her competence and resilience. Specialist Jennifer Walsh, positioned in the formation's third rank, found herself questioning her own perceptions of military training boundaries. "We'd all heard stories about tough instructors," she explained later. "But watching Rodriguez take that hit and just stay down, it made me wonder if maybe we'd all been overestimating our own readiness for real combat situations. If someone as capable as her could be broken that easily, what did that say about the rest of us?" The training cadre members, present 2 corporals and a staff sergeant, who had been observing the morning's exercises, exchanged uncertain glances as they processed the dramatic escalation of what had begun as routine instruction. Their combined years of military experience had taught them to recognize the difference between challenging training and inappropriate violence. But Master Sergeant Blackwood's authority and reputation made direct intervention a career-threatening proposition. Staff Sergeant Patricia Morales, responsible for overseeing safety protocols during combat training, felt a growing unease as she watched Rodriguez remain motionless on the ground. "Something felt wrong about the whole situation," she later testified. Rodriguez was known for bouncing back quickly from any challenge, but she was staying down longer than made sense for someone with her training and conditioning. It was almost like she was deliberately remaining in a vulnerable position. The mountain environment surrounding the training sector created an amphitheater effect that amplified every sound and gave the scene an almost theatrical quality. The rocky peaks rising on all sides seemed to tower over the human drama unfolding in the valley below, while the thin mountain air carried every whispered comment and nervous shuffle among the assembled personnel. With crystal clarity, base personnel passing nearby on routine duties found themselves slowing their pace to observe the unusual scene, recognizing that something significant was occurring at Training Sector Delta, but lacking the context to understand the full implications of what they were witnessing. The sight of an entire company standing in formation around a fallen soldier created an image that would be remembered and discussed long after the morning's events had concluded. What none of these observers could perceive was the subtle contradiction between Rodriguez's apparent vulnerability and certain details that didn't quite align with complete defeat. Her breathing, while appearing labored, maintained a rhythm that suggested conscious control rather than genuine distress. Her positioning on the ground, though seemingly random, actually provided optimal sight lines to monitor the positions and reactions of everyone present in the training area. Most significantly, despite the obvious pain from Blackwood's assault, her muscle tension remained that of someone prepared for immediate action rather than someone genuinely incapacitated by trauma and shock. These details were invisible to casual observation, but would prove crucial as the morning's events continued to unfold in directions that no one could have anticipated. The false impression of weakness and defeat that Rodriguez projected in those critical moments would soon be revealed as something far more complex and purposeful than anyone present could have imagined. Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood stood over Corporal Rodriguez with the satisfaction of an apex predator that had successfully demonstrated its dominance over challenging prey. At 38 years old, he represented everything the military's old guard believed about forging elite soldiers through uncompromising discipline and psychological pressure that pushed recruits far beyond their perceived limitations. His imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders broad enough to block doorways and arms that resembled tree trunks, had intimidated thousands of soldiers throughout his distinguished career at mountain warfare facilities across the western United States. Blackwood's background read like a textbook example of military excellence corrupted by unchecked authority and personal demons that had festered over years of isolation in remote training commands. Born in rural Montana to a family with 3 generations of military service, he had enlisted immediately after high school graduation, driven by a combination of patriotic duty and desperate need to escape the suffocating limitations of small-town life. His early career had been exemplary: rapid promotions, commendations for leadership under pressure, recognition as one of the Army's most promising non-commissioned officers. The transformation from promising leader to abusive tyrant had occurred gradually over his assignment to mountain warfare training facilities, where the combination of minimal oversight, extreme environmental conditions, and constant responsibility for preparing soldiers for life or death situations had slowly eroded his perspective on appropriate training methods. 3 tours in Afghanistan had exposed him to combat situations where hesitation meant death, experiences that convinced him that only the harshest training could adequately prepare soldiers for the reality of warfare. The problem with today's military, Blackwood had explained during a training conference the previous year, is that we've become too concerned with hurt feelings and psychological comfort. The enemy doesn't care about your self-esteem. Mountains don't adjust their difficulty based on your emotional state. Weather doesn't become less dangerous because you weren't properly challenged during training. My job is to break every weakness before it can get someone killed in operational environments. His philosophy had evolved into what other instructors privately called the Blackwood method, a systematic approach to military training that deliberately pushed recruits past their breaking points to identify character flaws and capability limitations that might prove fatal under combat conditions. The method had produced some of the military's finest mountain warfare specialists, soldiers whose performance in extreme environments had earned recognition throughout special operations communities. However, the Blackwood method had also generated an alarming number of psychological casualties: recruits who completed training technically qualified, but carrying emotional trauma that affected their long-term military service. Medical reports documented increased rates of anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress symptoms among soldiers who had undergone Blackwood's training programs. But these statistics were carefully buried in classified files that never reached oversight committees or congressional review panels. Steelridge's commanding officers had received multiple informal complaints about Blackwood's methods over the past 2 years, but his consistently high graduation rates and the exceptional performance of his trained soldiers in operational deployments had provided protection against formal disciplinary action. The military's results-oriented culture prioritized measurable outcomes over subjective concerns about training methodology, creating an environment where Blackwood's harsh approach was tolerated as long as it produced capable soldiers. Personal factors had contributed to the gradual hardening of Blackwood's character and the increasing severity of his training methods. His marriage had collapsed 3 years earlier when his wife could no longer tolerate the emotional distance and occasional violence that military service had ingrained in his personality. His relationship with his 2 teenage children had deteriorated to the point where court-ordered visitation was the only contact he maintained. With his former family, alcohol had become his primary coping mechanism for dealing with isolation and professional stress. Though he maintained enough self-control to avoid obvious impairment during duty hours, his off-duty drinking had escalated to levels that concerned his few remaining friends among the base personnel. But military culture's tolerance for heavy drinking among combat veterans had prevented intervention efforts that might have addressed his deteriorating mental health. The combination of personal demons, professional isolation, and years of unchecked authority had created a powder keg of resentment and aggression that manifested in increasingly harsh treatment of recruits under his command. Blackwood had begun to view training exercises as opportunities to work through his own psychological issues by breaking soldiers who reminded him of his own perceived failures and disappointments. Corporal Rodriguez had triggered particularly intense hostility because her quiet competence and unshakable composure reminded him of qualities he had once possessed but felt he had lost through years of military service and personal trauma. Her ability to excel without apparent effort challenged his belief that only through suffering could soldiers develop genuine capability, threatening the philosophical foundation that justified his increasingly extreme training methods. Some people think military training should be about building confidence and self-esteem. Blackwood had told his assistant instructors during a briefing session the previous week. That's civilian thinking that gets soldiers killed. Real military training identifies weakness and crushes it before it can compromise mission success. Rodriguez thinks she's special because she scores well on tests and handles equipment properly, but I haven't seen her break yet. Every soldier has a breaking point, and finding it is part of my responsibility. His reputation among other drill instructors was complex, a mixture of professional respect for his undeniable expertise and personal discomfort with his increasingly extreme methods. Younger instructors had begun requesting transfers away from his programs, while veteran trainers who remembered his earlier, more balanced approach watched with growing concern as he descended into what appeared to be systematic abuse, disguised as rigorous instruction. The morning's confrontation with Rodriguez represented the culmination of weeks of escalating tension between Blackwood's need to demonstrate dominance and her consistent refusal to show the fear and submission he expected from recruits. Her calm competence had become a personal challenge that he felt compelled to overcome, regardless of appropriate training, boundaries, or professional ethics. What Blackwood failed to recognize was that his assault on Rodriguez had crossed lines that would trigger consequences extending far beyond his understanding or ability to control, bringing scrutiny from authorities whose power dwarfed his own and whose commitment to military justice would prove far more absolute than his commitment to breaking soldiers through violence and intimidation. Corporal Emma Rodriguez had arrived at Camp Steelridge 6 months earlier on a transport convoy that wound through the treacherous mountain passes leading to the remote Colorado facility, carrying with her a carefully constructed background that appeared utterly unremarkable to anyone reviewing standard military personnel files. Her official records painted the picture of a dedicated but ordinary soldier born in the small desert town of Mesquite Springs, Arizona, daughter of a retired postal worker and an elementary school teacher. Graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in communications. No prior military experience, no family connections to the armed forces. No special skills that would distinguish her from thousands of other college graduates seeking purpose through military service. Yet, from her very first day at the Mountain Warfare Training Facility, Emma had managed to accomplish something that bordered on the impossible in an environment specifically designed to scrutinize every detail of a soldier's performance and behavior. She had achieved absolute excellence while remaining completely invisible to the kind of attention that such achievement typically generated among training personnel and fellow recruits alike. At 26 years old, Emma possessed the kind of understated appearance that allowed her to blend seamlessly into any military formation without drawing unwanted scrutiny from instructors or curiosity from her peers. Her auburn hair was always maintained at regulation length, secured in a practical bun that never violated grooming standards or attracted notice during inspections. Her uniforms displayed the meticulous attention to detail that spoke of deep respect for military tradition. Pressed creases sharp enough to cut paper, boots polished to mirror-like perfection, equipment arranged with geometric precision that exceeded standard requirements. Despite this flawless adherence to military protocol, Emma somehow managed to avoid the kind of recognition that typically accompanied such dedication to excellence. Her fellow soldiers had nicknamed her the Shadow during their 3rd week of training together, not from any sense of mockery or criticism, but from genuine bewilderment at her ability to perform at the highest levels while somehow remaining beneath the notice of instructors who usually seized upon any opportunity to highlight exceptional performance. Private Lisa Santos, who had been assigned as Emma's equipment partner since arriving at Camp Steelridge, later described the phenomenon that had puzzled everyone in their training unit. Emma would absolutely destroy every marksmanship test, complete every physical challenge faster than recruits twice her size, and volunteer for the most dangerous mountain rescue simulations without hesitation, Santos recalled. But somehow, when the instructors were handing out recognition or calling attention to outstanding performance, it was like she had figured out how to be invisible. They would acknowledge her scores and move on as if nothing remarkable had happened. Her background, according to the personnel files available to training staff, contained no elements that would explain her extraordinary capabilities. The small town of Mesquite Springs, Arizona, appeared to be exactly what military records indicate: a desert community of fewer than 3,000 residents, surrounded by empty landscape and offering limited opportunities for the kind of advanced training that Emma consistently demonstrated. Her university education had focused on communications and media studies, fields that provided no obvious preparation for the sophisticated tactical knowledge she displayed during complex mountain warfare exercises. Master Sergeant Blackwood had initially paid minimal attention to Corporal Rodriguez beyond ensuring she met basic training standards and maintained discipline within the ranks. In his experience, soldiers who performed well without causing problems were valuable assets who required minimal supervision and never generated the kind of incidents that reflected poorly on his training record. Emma had appeared to fit perfectly into this category: competent, reliable, and refreshingly free of the ego problems that often accompanied high-performing recruits. During weapons training sessions, Emma had consistently scored in the top 2% of all participants. But she accomplished these results without the celebration or competitive behavior that usually accompanied such achievement. While other soldiers cheered and congratulated each other after hitting difficult targets, Emma would simply nod respectfully to the range instructor, secure her weapon according to protocol, and prepare for the next training evolution without comment or self-promotion. Her scores were dutifully recorded in the computer systems that tracked recruit progress. But somehow these exceptional results never generated the sustained attention or investigation that should have accompanied such consistent excellence. It was as if Emma had discovered a method for achieving outstanding performance while remaining completely forgettable to the personnel responsible for recognizing and developing exceptional talent. Mountain warfare exercises had revealed Emma's most puzzling capabilities. Despite her relatively small stature and the complete absence of rock climbing or mountaineering experience in her official background, she navigated the treacherous Colorado terrain with the kind of intuitive confidence that usually required years of specialized training. She could read weather patterns with accuracy that impressed veteran mountain guides, identify safe camping locations that provided optimal tactical advantages, and execute high-altitude rescue procedures with technical precision that belonged to advanced special operations training rather than basic military instruction. Captain Bradley Morrison, who supervised complex tactical scenarios designed to test recruit readiness for mountain deployment, had noted Emma's exceptional situational awareness in his weekly assessment reports. Rodriguez demonstrates an almost supernatural ability to anticipate terrain challenges and tactical complications, he had written. Her decision-making under stress suggests extensive prior experience with mountain operations, but her personnel file contains no indication of relevant background or training that would account for such advanced capabilities. Equipment maintenance presented another area where Emma's mysterious expertise became apparent to observant instructors. While other recruits struggled with the sophisticated communications and navigation devices required for modern mountain warfare, Emma operated these systems with effortless proficiency that bordered on intuitive understanding. She could troubleshoot malfunctions that stumped technical instructors, optimize performance settings that improved functionality beyond manufacturer specifications, and adapt to equipment variations without consulting manuals or seeking guidance from training personnel. Her fellow recruits had become accustomed to seeking Emma's assistance with technical problems, knowing she would patiently help them master complex procedures without making them feel inadequate or incompetent. Yet when questioned about where she had acquired such extensive knowledge, Emma would invariably deflect with modest explanations about reading technical manuals during off-duty hours or having worked with similar equipment during temporary civilian jobs before enlisting. What none of her colleagues or instructors realized was that every aspect of Emma's seemingly ordinary background had been carefully constructed to withstand routine military screening while concealing capabilities that had been developed through years of training that existed far above the classification level of standard Army personnel files. The advanced combat training demonstration had begun with the routine precision that characterized all morning exercises at Camp Steelridge. But the atmosphere in Training Sector Delta began shifting subtly as Master Sergeant Blackwood called for individual performance assessments that would test each recruit's ability to execute defensive maneuvers against experienced instructors serving as aggressive opponents. The psychological pressure was intentionally intense, designed to evaluate not just physical techniques learned over months of instruction, but mental resilience under the kind of stress that simulated actual combat conditions. Emma Rodriguez had drawn Blackwood himself as her assigned opponent for the hand-to-hand combat evaluation. A pairing that initially seemed routine but would prove to carry significance that extended far beyond anyone's expectations. As she took her position on the designated combat mat, adjusting her protective gear and preparing mentally for the engagement, nothing in her demeanor suggested she viewed this encounter as anything other than another training exercise to be completed with the same quiet competence she brought to every military task. The early exchanges followed predictable patterns established through months of instruction and practice. Blackwood threw controlled strikes designed to test Emma's defensive reactions, her ability to maintain proper stance under pressure, and her capacity to execute the counterattack maneuvers they had practiced extensively throughout their mountain warfare curriculum. She responded with textbook precision, blocking attacks with efficient movements that demonstrated solid understanding of defensive principles while maintaining the kind of composed focus that had become her trademark during training exercises. Her performance was technically excellent, professionally competent, and utterly unremarkable, exactly what observers had come to expect from the recruit, who excelled at everything while somehow avoiding the attention that such excellence typically generated. The assembled soldiers watched with the casual interest of personnel waiting for their own evaluation turns, anticipating a demonstration that would reinforce standard techniques before moving on to the next scheduled training evolution. However, as the demonstration continued beyond its normal parameters, Master Sergeant Blackwood began increasing the intensity and aggression of his attacks in ways that pushed the exercise toward actual combat rather than instructional evaluation. His strikes came faster and with greater force, testing limits that moved the encounter beyond comfortable training boundaries into territory that made experienced observers increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "Come on, Rodriguez," Blackwood taunted, throwing a combination that forced Emma to retreat across the mat while maintaining defensive posture. "All those perfect scores don't mean anything when someone's actually trying to hurt you, do they? Let's see what happens when you can't rely on memorized techniques and controlled environments." The other recruits began noticing subtle changes in the dynamic that suggested this was no longer a routine training demonstration. Blackwood's breathing had grown heavier, not from physical exertion, but from the kind of escalating aggression that veteran soldiers recognized as a warning sign of impending loss of control. His movements carried personal animosity that had nothing to do with instructional objectives and everything to do with the psychological pressure that had been building between instructor and recruit over weeks of subtle confrontation. Emma continued responding with measured competence, but careful observers began detecting something unusual in her defensive patterns. Her techniques remained flawlessly executed according to standard military training doctrine, but there was an economy of motion, an efficiency of response that suggested capabilities extending beyond what recruits should have acquired through 6 months of mountain warfare instruction. She seemed to anticipate Blackwood's attacks with split-second timing that spoke of extensive combat experience rather than classroom learning. Private Chun, positioned in the front row of observers, later recalled noticing that Emma's defensive movements seemed almost effortless despite Blackwood's increasing aggression. "It was like watching someone who was holding back," he explained during subsequent interviews. "She was doing exactly what the training manual required, but there were moments when it looked like she could have done much more if she had chosen to. It was subtle, but something felt different about the way she moved compared to how the rest of us handled combat training." The confrontation reached its first critical escalation point when Blackwood, frustrated by his inability to break through Emma's consistently effective defenses, abandoned the pretense of controlled instruction entirely. His attacks became deliberately vicious, designed to cause genuine harm rather than test technique, crossing every line that separated challenging training from personal assault, motivated by wounded pride and professional insecurity. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you, Rodriguez?" he snarled, throwing a vicious combination that carried the full weight of his considerable size and strength. Time to learn what real mountain warfare feels like when the enemy isn't playing by training rules. Emma's response to this escalated aggression revealed glimpses of capability that sent shockwaves through the assembled observers. Her defensive maneuver was executed with such fluid precision that it seemed to defy normal human reaction times, a technique that belonged to special operations training rather than standard military instruction. She didn't just block Blackwood's attack, she redirected his momentum and energy in a way that sent him stumbling backward while simultaneously positioning herself in a stance that promised devastating consequences if he continued his assault. The technique lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds revealed years of training that no ordinary recruit should have possessed. Her footwork demonstrated the kind of balance and spatial awareness that required decades to master. Her hand movements showed knowledge of leverage points and pressure techniques that were taught only in the most advanced military combat programs. Most significantly, her tactical awareness during the exchange revealed she was simultaneously calculating multiple response options while monitoring the positions and reactions of every person in the surrounding area. Staff Sergeant Morales, observing from the instructor area, found herself stepping backward involuntarily as she processed what she had just witnessed. "That wasn't standard defensive training," she whispered to the corporal beside her. "That was something completely different. Something professional." The murmur of surprised conversation began rippling through the assembled recruits as they recognized they had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of normal military training boundaries. Emma's technique had revealed capabilities that belonged to an entirely different category of military experience, suggesting background and preparation that extended far beyond anything found in standard personnel files. Master Sergeant Blackwood, however, was too consumed by humiliation and rage to recognize the implications of what Emma had just demonstrated. Her competent defense only intensified his determination to reassert dominance through escalating violence, setting the stage for confrontations that would trigger consequences extending far beyond his understanding or ability to control. 3 miles away from Training Sector Delta, in the heavily fortified communication center that served as Camp Steelridge's nerve center for monitoring all base activities, Technical Sergeant Maria Vasquez was conducting her routine morning shift when her workstation suddenly erupted with priority alerts that she had never encountered during her 7 years of military communications duty. The sophisticated monitoring systems that tracked personnel locations, vital signs, and equipment status across the sprawling mountain facility began displaying warning indicators that triggered automatic protocols reserved for only the most critical emergency situations. The small device attached to Emma Rodriguez's utility belt appearing to casual observation as nothing more than standard military communication equipment was actually a highly classified monitoring system connected to security networks that operated at classification levels far above anything found at routine Army training facilities. The moment Master Sergeant Blackwood's first aggressive strike had exceeded normal training parameters, sensors embedded within the device had begun transmitting encrypted data streams to secure servers located deep within Camp Steelridge's command infrastructure. Sergeant Vasquez stared at her display screen in growing disbelief as alert codes appeared that she had seen only during classified briefings about theoretical emergency scenarios. The priority level indicated someone with the highest possible security clearance was experiencing immediate physical assault, triggering automatic responses that bypassed normal command channels and connected directly to oversight authorities whose very existence was classified above her access level. "Ma'am," she called to her shift supervisor, Master Sergeant Linda Holloway, her voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "I'm seeing a Code Alpha 9 alert from Training Sector Delta. Ma'am," she called to her shift supervisor, Master Sergeant Linda Holloway, her voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "I'm seeing a Code Alpha 9 alert from Training Sector Delta. The system is indicating that someone with Level 7 clearance is currently under direct physical attack by military personnel. This can't be correct. There's nobody assigned to Camp Steelridge with that kind of security classification." Master Sergeant Holloway rushed to Vasquez's workstation, her face growing pale as she processed the information streaming across multiple monitors. Level 7 clearance was reserved for personnel involved in the most sensitive intelligence operations. Individuals whose identities and assignments were protected by security protocols that existed entirely outside normal military administrative channels. The appearance of such an alert at a mountain warfare training facility should have been impossible according to everything she understood about base personnel assignments and operational security procedures. The automated systems were responding to the alert with mechanical precision that reflected years of preparation for exactly this type of scenario. Secure communication lines began activating throughout Camp Steelridge's command structure, connecting to networks that extended far beyond the base's normal operational boundaries. Priority messages were being transmitted simultaneously to oversight offices at the Pentagon, specialized departments within military intelligence agencies, and emergency response coordinators whose responsibilities included protecting personnel engaged in the most classified government operations. "Sir, we have an unprecedented situation developing," Holloway reported to Colonel Harrison, the base commander, her voice professionally controlled despite the extraordinary nature of what she was reporting. "Automated security systems are indicating that someone with the highest possible clearance level is currently experiencing physical assault at one of our training areas. The alert includes real-time medical monitoring, data showing trauma consistent with deliberate violence rather than training accidents." The silence on Colonel Harrison's secure phone line lasted exactly 6 seconds, long enough for him to access classified databases and verify what the monitoring systems were reporting. When he responded, his voice carried the absolute authority that comes from understanding the full implications of a critical situation that could affect national security operations at the highest levels. "Initiate Condition Omega protocols immediately," he commanded, using terminology that activated emergency procedures reserved for threats to personnel whose identities were protected by presidential directive. "Establish complete lockdown of Training Sector Delta. No personnel enter or leave without my direct authorization. Deploy the rapid response team with full tactical gear and prepare for immediate intervention. I want 4 full colonels en route to that location within the next 4 minutes. And I want absolute communication security on this incident until we determine exactly what we're dealing with." As Colonel Harrison's orders cascaded through Camp Steelridge's command hierarchy, a carefully orchestrated emergency response began unfolding with precision that demonstrated extensive preparation for scenarios involving compromised deep cover operations. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base's senior intelligence officer, was extracted from a routine briefing about equipment procurement and directed to report immediately to the motor pool with complete tactical equipment and classified briefing materials. Colonel David Chen, responsible for coordinating special operations activities throughout the mountain region, received similar orders while reviewing personnel evaluation reports in his secure office. His background in covert operations provided him with clearance levels that granted access to information about certain classified assignments, but even his briefings hadn't included specific details about the individual whose emergency alert was currently triggering. The most serious response protocols in Camp Steelridge's operational history. Colonel Rebecca Torres, the base's liaison to classified military programs operating throughout the western United States, was in the middle of a secure video conference with Pentagon officials discussing budget allocations for overseas intelligence operations when her aide burst into the room with emergency orders that superseded all other priorities. The conversation she had been conducting dealing with funding for surveillance programs in Eastern Europe was immediately terminated as she gathered her equipment and headed for the emergency response vehicles. The 4th Colonel, James Bradford, served as Camp Steelridge's Chief of Security and Counterintelligence Operations. His responsibilities included oversight of all classified activities conducted within the base's jurisdiction, providing him with access to information about special personnel assignments that operated under various cover identities. However, even his extensive briefings hadn't included complete details about the specific operation whose compromise was currently generating the highest priority emergency response in the facility's history. Meanwhile, at Training Sector Delta, the automated monitoring systems continued tracking vital signs and threat assessments with mechanical precision, documenting every aspect of the escalating confrontation between Master Sergeant Blackwood and the individual he knew only as Corporal Emma Rodriguez. The sophisticated sensors embedded in her equipment were recording not just medical data indicating physical trauma, but also tactical information about the developing situation that would be crucial for the response teams racing toward the training area. The device monitoring Emma's condition transmitted detailed information about Blackwood's increasing aggression, the reactions of witnesses present at the scene, and the precise nature of the techniques she was employing to defend herself against attacks that had moved far beyond acceptable training parameters. This real-time intelligence was being processed by computers, designed to assess threats to personnel whose safety was considered critical to ongoing national security operations. What none of the emergency responders racing toward Training Sector Delta fully understood was that they were about to discover an identity protected by the highest levels of government classification, revealing an operation that had been years in development and whose exposure would require massive coordinated efforts to manage the security implications of a blown deep cover assignment involving someone whose true role in military intelligence extended far beyond anything found in routine personnel files. Situation at Training Sector Delta reached its point of no return when Master Sergeant Blackwood's frustration and wounded pride overcame the last vestiges of professional judgment that had constrained his behavior throughout 15 years of military service. Emma Rodriguez's demonstration of superior defensive capabilities had not humbled him or prompted recognition of her exceptional skills. Instead, it had triggered a psychological break that transformed routine training into a criminal assault that would destroy everything he had built during his decorated career. You think you're some kind of special operations hotshot, don't you? Blackwood screamed, his voice carrying across the mountain training facility with undisguised fury that made several recruits instinctively step backward from the combat mat. I don't care what kind of fancy techniques you learned in some weekend martial arts class. You're just another recruit in my training program. And I'm going to teach you what happens when soldiers forget their place in the chain of command. The 34 other members of Delta Company stood frozen in formation, watching their drill instructor prepare to assault a fellow soldier with clear intent to cause serious harm. The morning's combat training exercise had devolved into something that bore no resemblance to military instruction. This was personal violence motivated by ego and rage, crossing every boundary that separated challenging education from criminal behavior. Emma remained in her defensive stance, blood still trickling from her split lip where Blackwood's initial strike had connected. Her breathing controlled and measured despite the obvious pain she was experiencing. Her posture maintained the kind of alert readiness that suggested extensive experience with genuinely dangerous situations. But she made no aggressive moves that might escalate the confrontation beyond what was already occurring. "Stand down, Sergeant," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying just enough authority to suggest she was accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them, though she maintained the respectful tone appropriate for addressing a superior officer. "This training exercise has accomplished its objectives. There's no need for anyone to get seriously injured over a demonstration that's already provided valuable learning opportunities for everyone present." The words were diplomatically phrased and professionally delivered, but Blackwood interpreted Emma's calm response as the ultimate insult, a recruit presuming to give orders to a master sergeant, demonstrating the kind of insubordination that challenged his fundamental understanding of military hierarchy and The strike he threw was delivered with vicious intent, a backhand blow aimed at Emma's face with enough force to cause significant injury and permanent scarring. This wasn't training, it was assault with intent to inflict maximum physical and psychological damage, executed in front of dozens of witnesses who would be forced to confront their own helplessness in the face of institutionalized abuse of power. Emma's response revealed capabilities that transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation and exposed the carefully maintained facade she had constructed over months of undercover operation. Her defensive movement was executed with such devastating precision that it seemed to violate the laws of physics, a combination of speed, technique, and tactical awareness that belonged to special operations training rather than anything taught in standard military instruction programs. She didn't just avoid Blackwood's attack. She redirected his momentum and energy while simultaneously executing a counterattack that demonstrated years of advanced combat training. The technique she employed was so sophisticated that even experienced military observers couldn't immediately identify its origin or classification level. Within 3 seconds, Master Sergeant Blackwood found himself flat on his back, completely immobilized by a joint lock that could have easily resulted in permanent disability if Emma had chosen to apply additional pressure. The training ground fell into absolute silence as every person present processed what they had just witnessed. Private Rodriguez, the quiet recruit who had spent months blending invisibly into formations, had just systematically dismantled an assault by one of the military's most experienced combat instructors using techniques that belonged to the highest levels of special operations training. Her execution had been flawless, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next while maintaining perfect awareness of her surroundings and potential collateral effects. The speed and precision with which she had neutralized Blackwood's attack left no question that these were not skills acquired through 6 months of mountain warfare training or weekend martial arts classes. Staff Sergeant Morales, observing from the instructor area, found herself questioning everything she thought she understood about military training and personnel assignments. "That technique," she whispered to the corporal beside her. "I've never seen anything like that in 15 years of service. That belonged to a completely different level of military training than anything we teach here." The other recruits began murmuring among themselves, their voices carrying the nervous energy that comes from realizing they had been living and training alongside someone whose true capabilities extended far beyond anything they had imagined possible. Private Santos, who had been Emma's equipment partner for months, stared in shocked recognition that every interaction they had shared took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of what she had just witnessed. Emma maintained the submission hold with effortless control, while blood continued to drip from her facial injuries, her breathing steady and her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding area with the kind of tactical awareness that spoke of extensive combat experience in genuinely dangerous operational environments. Her posture remained alert but relaxed, suggesting this level of physical confrontation was entirely routine rather than extraordinary. But rather than ending the confrontation, Emma's demonstration of superior combat skills only intensified Blackwood's humiliation and rage. As she released the hold and stepped back, offering him the opportunity to end the situation with whatever dignity he could salvage, his psychological break became complete. The realization that he had been defeated by someone he had assumed was an ordinary recruit triggered the kind of uncontrolled fury that would destroy his career and trigger consequences extending far beyond his comprehension. "That's impossible," he gasped, rolling to his feet with murder in his eyes. "No recruit learns those techniques. No college graduate with 6 months of training moves like that. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Rodriguez, but I'm going to finish what I started." The assault that followed would activate the final sequence of emergency protocols that had been building since the first alert, bringing revelations that would shock everyone present and expose an identity protected by the highest levels of national security classification. 4 colonels' vehicles converged on training sector Delta with synchronized precision that demonstrated years of coordinated emergency response training. Their black SUVs cutting through the mountain terrain with urgent purpose while emergency lights flashed in patterns that immediately identified them as carrying the highest levels of military authority. The sight of senior officers responding with such urgency to what appeared to be a routine training exercise sent ripples of confusion and apprehension through base personnel who witnessed their rapid passage across Camp Steelridge's network of access roads. Colonel Sarah Mitchell emerged from the lead vehicle before it had completely stopped, her intelligence officer training immediately assessing the tactical situation as she surveyed the scene that had triggered the most serious emergency response in the facility's operational history. 34 recruits stood in an irregular formation around the combat mat where 2 figures faced each other. One a blood-covered soldier in standard training fatigues, the other a master sergeant whose posture radiated aggressive, intent and barely controlled rage. The body language of everyone present told a story of escalating violence and complete breakdown of normal training protocols. Several recruits showed signs of genuine fear and confusion, while training cadre members maintained positions that suggested they were uncertain about appropriate intervention procedures when faced with a superior officer's loss of control. The mountain environment amplified the tension, with rocky peaks towering over the human drama unfolding in the valley below. "Master Sergeant Blackwood." Colonel Mitchell's voice cut across the training ground with absolute authority that instantly froze every person present, her command carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question or hesitation. "Step away from the recruit immediately and assume the position of attention. You are relieved of all training responsibilities pending immediate investigation of your conduct." Her words carried implications that sent shock waves through the assembled personnel as they began recognizing that senior command authority was treating this incident as something far more serious than a training exercise that had gotten out of hand. The presence of 4 full colonels, emergency response vehicles, and the kind of urgent mobilization typically reserved for national security incidents focused entirely on what had appeared to be an internal disciplinary matter involving routine personnel. Colonel David Chun positioned himself with tactical awareness that immediately established control over the situation's geometry, his special operations background evident in how he surveyed potential threats, while maintaining visual contact with all personnel present in the training area. His eyes lingered on Emma Rodriguez for several seconds, noting details that weren't immediately apparent to casual observation: her stance, her breathing patterns, the way she maintained alertness despite obvious injuries. Medical team to training sector Delta immediately. Colonel Rebecca Torres spoke into her secure radio. Her liaison experience with classified programs evident in how she coordinated multiple response elements simultaneously. We need trauma assessment, documentation photography, and evidence collection protocols. Also dispatch security personnel to establish a complete perimeter around this area. Nobody enters or leaves without direct authorization from command authority. Master Sergeant Blackwood turned toward the approaching officers, his face still flushed with rage, but now showing the first signs of genuine confusion as he processed the unprecedented nature of the response to what he had assumed was an internal training matter. 4 full colonels, emergency vehicles, medical teams, and security lockdown procedures all focused on his confrontation with a single recruit who should have been completely insignificant in the broader scope of military operations. "Sir, I was conducting routine combat readiness assessment," he began, his voice showing the first tremors of someone realizing that their understanding of the situation was fundamentally flawed. This recruit was demonstrating insubordination and needed correction according to established disciplinary procedures. The training exercise got somewhat intense, but that's normal for advanced mountain warfare preparation. Colonel Chun's response was delivered with controlled intensity that immediately silenced any further attempts at justification. "Sergeant, you will remain silent until specifically authorized to speak. You are being relieved of all duties and confined pending formal investigation into criminal assault charges. Military police are en route to escort you to detention while we determine the full scope of your actions and their implications." The mention of criminal charges rather than administrative discipline sent additional shockwaves through the assembled personnel as they began understanding that they were witnessing something that extended far beyond routine military justice procedures. The arrival of 4 colonels, the mobilization of emergency response teams, and now the prospect of felony prosecution against a decorated master sergeant, all focused on what had appeared to be a standard combat training demonstration. Private Chun, positioned in the front row of observers, found himself studying Emma's interactions with the senior officers and noticing details that hadn't been apparent during months of shared training experiences. The way she responded to their questions suggested familiarity with command-level protocols that extended far beyond basic military instruction. Her posture, despite visible injuries, maintained the kind of professional bearing that spoke to extensive experience with high-level military interactions. Colonel James Bradford, serving as security chief, initiated formal evidence collection procedures that treated the incident as a potential criminal assault rather than a training accident that could be resolved through administrative channels. The photographs, statements, and physical evidence being gathered would support legal proceedings that could result in court-martial charges carrying significant prison sentences and dishonorable discharge. Consequences. Emma Rodriguez stood throughout the colonel's arrival, blood continuing to flow from her facial injuries, but her professional composure remaining intact despite the trauma she had endured. To the assembled recruits, she appeared to be maintaining the same quiet dignity that had characterized her behavior throughout months of training. But the 4 colonels approaching her processed information that connected her appearance to classified briefings and personnel files that existed far above normal military channels. "Corporal Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell said, her voice carrying a tone of professional respect that seemed completely inappropriate for addressing a basic training recruit. "Are you injured seriously enough to require immediate medical evacuation? We need to assess your condition before proceeding with formal documentation of this incident." The question was phrased with careful consideration. typically reserved for addressing personnel of significant importance rather than standard military trainees. The other recruits exchanged bewildered glances as they witnessed their drill instructors in training, cadre being systematically displaced by senior officers whose attention seemed focused entirely on the quiet soldier they had known as an unremarkable member of their formation. Colonel Torres was conducting quiet conversations on her secure radio, her words carefully chosen to avoid revealing classified information, while coordinating with agencies whose involvement suggested implications extending far beyond routine military discipline. "Confirm identity verification through shadowbox protocols," she said, using terminology that none of the training personnel recognized but which carried obvious significance for the officers present. The transformation of the situation from routine training to high-level emergency response was complete, but the most significant revelations were yet to come as Colonel Mitchell prepared to ask the question that would finally expose the true identity of the recruit whose presence at Camp Steelridge had been protected by security classifications reaching the highest levels of national defense planning. Colonel Mitchell approached Emma Rodriguez with the measured steps of someone who understood they were about to initiate a disclosure process that would fundamentally alter everyone's perception of reality and military hierarchy. The medical team had completed their preliminary assessment, documenting facial trauma consistent with deliberate assault while photographing injuries that would support serious criminal charges against Master Sergeant Blackwood. But the medical evaluation was merely procedural compared to the classified revelation that was about to unfold. The four colonels had positioned themselves in a tactical formation that provided security while ensuring clear sight lines to all personnel present in Training Sector Delta. Their coordinated movement and professional bearing indicated extensive experience with situations involving compromised deep cover operations, but even their classified briefings hadn't prepared them for the full implications of what they were about to discover regarding the true identity of the recruit whose emergency alert had triggered the most serious response. Protocols in Camp Steelridge's history. Corporal Rodriguez, Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying the formal tone reserved for addressing personnel whose actual status required careful protocol management and absolute precision in documentation. For the official record and in the presence of these witnesses, please state your complete name, actual rank, service identification number, and current operational assignment. The request appeared routine to the assembled recruits who had no understanding of classification levels or the significance of formal identity verification procedures. But the four colonels recognized they were initiating a disclosure process that had been carefully planned for exactly this type of emergency situation. The protocols they were following had been developed to manage the exposure of deep cover operatives while protecting ongoing intelligence operations from complete compromise. Emma wiped blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the trauma she had endured from Blackwood's assault. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to emerge from years of command experience rather than months of basic training, revealing vocal patterns and professional bearing that belonged to someone accustomed to briefing senior officers rather than receiving instruction from drill sergeants. Lieutenant Colonel Emma Rodriguez, United States Army Intelligence and Security Command, Special Activities Division, she stated clearly, her words carrying across the mountain training facility with the kind of crisp articulation that belonged to formal military briefings. Service Classification Ultra 7, currently assigned to Operation Mountain Shadow. Deep Cover Security Assessment of Advanced Training Protocols. Operational designation maintained as Corporal Emma Rodriguez for counterintelligence purposes. The silence that followed her statement was so profound that the only sounds audible across Training Sector Delta were the mountain wind and the distant hum of emergency vehicles continuing to arrive at the facility. Every recruit, every instructor, every observer present found themselves processing information that challenged their fundamental understanding of military hierarchy, operational security, and the true nature of the person they had known as a quiet, unremarkable member of their training unit. Private Santos, standing 15 feet away, felt her knees weaken as she realized she had been sharing living quarters with a lieutenant colonel whose real assignment involved intelligence operations classified far above her security clearance. "She's been a lieutenant colonel this entire time," she whispered to the recruit beside her, who was staring at Emma with the kind of shocked recognition that comes from suddenly understanding that every interaction over the past 6 months had been part of an elaborate counterintelligence operation. Master Sergeant Blackwood's face drained of all color as the implications of what he had just heard penetrated his consciousness with devastating clarity. He had not merely assaulted a recruit during training exercises. He had physically attacked a superior officer of significantly higher rank who was engaged in classified operations requiring the highest levels of security protection. The realization that his career was not just over, but that he faced potential treason charges for compromising national security operations, sent him staggering backward in complete disbelief. Colonel Chun stepped forward, his special operations background enabling him to appreciate the complexity and personal sacrifice required for maintaining deep cover assignments within regular military units for extended periods. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, how long have you been operating under this cover assignment? And what is the scope of your operational objectives?" 18 months total deployment, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the blood still trickling from her facial injuries. 12 months at Fort Carson conducting infiltration assessment of personnel security protocols. 6 months here at Camp Steelridge evaluating training security compliance, instructor reliability assessment, and operational security vulnerabilities in advanced mountain warfare programs. Her response revealed that her assignment to Delta Company had been far from random placement. She had been systematically testing the military's ability to detect and respond to potential security threats while evaluating the integrity and professionalism of training personnel. The instructors and cadre members who had been assessing Emma's performance for months found themselves realizing that they had been the subjects of evaluation rather than the evaluators, with every interaction and procedure being observed and analyzed by someone whose real mission involved identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services. Colonel Torres was coordinating with multiple agencies through her secure communications equipment, her liaison responsibilities requiring immediate management of the broader implications of a blown deep cover operation. "We need immediate extraction protocols initiated," she spoke into her encrypted radio. "Operation Mountain Shadow has been compromised and requires full security reassessment. Also notify Pentagon oversight that we have a Level 1 breach involving assault on classified personnel." Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's true identity began explaining details that had puzzled observers. Throughout her time at Camp Steelridge, her exceptional marksmanship scores, her intuitive understanding of advanced tactical procedures, her ability to troubleshoot sophisticated equipment, her mysterious familiarity with mountain warfare techniques, all of these capabilities now made perfect sense as the professional skills of an intelligence officer with extensive field experience and advanced military training rather than the puzzling talents of an unusually gifted recruit. Staff Sergeant Morales, who had been monitoring various aspects of Emma's training progress, suddenly understood why certain routine reports about exceptional performance had been classified. above her clearance level and routed through channels she couldn't access. The perfect scores, the technical knowledge, the way she helped everyone without taking credit, she said to her assistant. She wasn't trying to excel at recruit training. She was conducting professional assessment of our entire program while maintaining operational cover. The assembled recruits were processing the revelation that someone they had lived alongside, trained with, and considered a close friend had been operating under a completely fabricated identity for national security purposes. Private Walsh, who had served as Emma's bunkmate throughout their time at Camp Steelridge, later described feeling simultaneously betrayed and awed by the realization that her closest companion during training had been maintaining an elaborate deception while genuinely caring for the welfare and success of fellow soldiers. Colonel Bradford was initiating security protocols that would ensure the classified nature of Emma's assignment remained protected despite the public nature of its compromise. All personnel present are hereby bound by national security obligations, he announced to the formation with absolute authority. Any discussion of today's events outside official channels constitutes potential violation of federal law and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of military justice. Master Sergeant Blackwood, now understanding the full magnitude of his actions, attempted one final justification for behavior that had destroyed his career and potentially compromised national security operations. I had no way of knowing, he said, his voice breaking with realization that ignorance would provide no protection against the charges he faced. She appeared to be just another recruit in my training company. How was I supposed to recognize she was operating under deep cover? Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's response demonstrated the professionalism and leadership experience that had enabled her to maintain operational security for 18 months while conducting some of the military's most sensitive internal assessments. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's response to Blackwood's desperate attempt at justification demonstrated the leadership experience and professional integrity that had enabled her to maintain deep cover for 18 months while conducting critical intelligence assessments. Her words carried the weight of someone who understood command, responsibility, and the fundamental principles that governed military conduct, regardless of operational circumstances or classification levels. Master Sergeant Blackwood, your lack of knowledge regarding my actual assignment provides no excuse for assault on any soldier under your command, she stated with calm authority that silenced the training ground completely. The fact that I happen to be a lieutenant colonel conducting classified operations is entirely irrelevant to your decision to use violence against someone you believe to be a subordinate. Your actions constitute criminal assault regardless of my true rank or operational status. Her response revealed the core principle that had guided her behavior throughout the undercover assignment: genuine respect for all military personnel, regardless of apparent rank or status. The leadership philosophy that made her effective as an intelligence officer was the same commitment to treating every soldier with dignity that had enabled her to form authentic relationships while maintaining operational security for over a year. Colonel Bradford immediately initiated formal arrest procedures that reflected the severity of charges being brought against a master sergeant whose assault on a superior officer had compromised ongoing national security operations. Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood, you are under arrest for assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer, compromising classified operations, and violation of operational security protocols. He announced with official formality that made the legal implications unmistakably clear. Military police personnel arrived within minutes, their presence adding another layer of official authority to proceedings that had already transformed from routine training into criminal justice procedures. The sight of handcuffs being applied to a decorated master sergeant sent additional shock waves through assembled personnel who were still processing the revelation that their quiet colleague had been conducting intelligence operations under deep cover. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead military police officer informed Blackwood as standard Miranda procedures were initiated. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court-martial proceedings. You have the right to legal representation, and if you cannot afford civilian counsel, military defense attorneys will be appointed to represent your interests." The formal arrest procedures were conducted with meticulous attention to legal requirements that would ensure any subsequent court-martial proceedings could not be challenged on procedural grounds. Every aspect of evidence collection, witness documentation, and suspect processing followed protocols designed to support prosecution of serious felony charges that could result in decades of military prison sentences and dishonorable discharge. Consequences. Colonel Torres was coordinating immediate damage assessment procedures designed to determine whether Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's blown cover had compromised other ongoing intelligence operations throughout the military training system. "We need complete security review of all personnel who had contact with Operation Mountain Shadow," she spoke into her secure communications equipment. "Also initiate background investigations of anyone who might have suspected Rodriguez's true identity during her assignment." The implications of the compromised operation extended far beyond Camp Steelridge to include potential vulnerabilities in training facilities throughout the western United States where similar intelligence assessments might be ongoing. The exposure of one deep cover operative raised questions about the security of other classified personnel who might be conducting parallel operations under fabricated identities within regular military units. Medical personnel completed comprehensive documentation of Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's injuries, photographing evidence that would support aggravated assault charges while ensuring she received appropriate treatment for trauma sustained during Blackwood's attack. The medical reports would become crucial evidence in court-martial proceedings that would determine whether additional charges related to the severity of injuries and intent to cause permanent harm would be filed against the former master sergeant. Security teams established complete lockdown of training sector Delta while evidence collection specialists processed the scene with forensic precision typically reserved for major criminal investigations. Soil samples from areas where blood had fallen, measurements of impact patterns, and detailed photography of equipment positions would all contribute to reconstruction of events that had led to the compromise of a classified intelligence operation. The 34 recruits who had witnessed the confrontation were individually interviewed by intelligence specialists to assess what they had observed and ensure their legal obligations regarding classified information were clearly understood. Each would be required to sign additional security agreements and undergo debriefing sessions that emphasized federal criminal penalties for unauthorized disclosure of information related to intelligence operations. Colonel Mitchell initiated immediate coordination with Pentagon oversight offices responsible for managing compromised intelligence operations and determining whether operational security could be restored or whether complete mission termination would be required. "Washington needs immediate briefing on Mountain Shadow exposure," she reported through classified communications channels. "We have positive identification of hostile actions against deep cover operative and require guidance on extraction procedures." Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez remained at the scene throughout the arrest and evidence collection procedures, providing detailed statements about the escalation of violence while maintaining operational security regarding classified aspects of her assignment that couldn't be disclosed even under these emergency circumstances. Her professional composure, despite obvious injuries, demonstrated the kind of resilience and dedication that had enabled her to maintain cover for 18 months while conducting sensitive intelligence work. The transformation from routine training exercise to major intelligence incident was complete, but the broader implications of Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's exposed identity would continue, reverberating through military justice systems and intelligence oversight offices for months to come. Master Sergeant Blackwood's assault had not only destroyed his own career, but had potentially compromised national security operations whose full scope extended far beyond what anyone present at Camp Steelridge could fully comprehend. The immediate crisis response procedures were concluding, but the complex process of managing a blown deep cover operation while ensuring appropriate justice for criminal assault was just beginning to unfold through channels that would ultimately reach the highest levels of military command and civilian oversight of intelligence activities. The court-martial proceedings against former Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood commenced 4 months after the incident at Training Sector Delta, conducted within the secure confines of Camp Steelridge's military justice facility under conditions that reflected the sensitive nature of classified operations that had been compromised through his criminal assault. The proceedings represented one of the most significant cases of assault on a superior officer in recent military history, with implications that extended far beyond individual criminal behavior to encompass broader questions of operational security and the protection of deep cover intelligence personnel. Military Judge Colonel Patricia Hawkins presided over proceedings that required careful balancing of public justice requirements with national security considerations that demanded protection of ongoing intelligence operations. The courtroom had been configured to accommodate classified testimony while ensuring appropriate legal representation for both prosecution and defense, with security clearances verified for all personnel involved in the complex legal process. The prosecution, led by Major General Rebecca Martinez from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, presented evidence that painted a devastating picture of criminal behavior that had endangered national security operations while violating the most fundamental principles of military leadership and professional conduct. The charges filed against Blackwood reflected the severity of his actions and their broader implications for military discipline and operational security. The defendant stands accused of assault on a superior officer, a crime that strikes at the heart of military hierarchy and discipline, General Martinez stated during opening arguments. But this case extends beyond simple assault to encompass conduct that compromised ongoing intelligence operations critical to national security, demonstrating a pattern of behavior that violated every principle of military professionalism and personal integrity. The evidence presented included comprehensive medical documentation of Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez's injuries, forensic analysis of the training ground where the assault occurred, and detailed testimony from the 34 witnesses who had observed Blackwood's loss of control during what should have been routine training exercises. Video surveillance from security cameras positioned throughout Training Sector Delta provided incontrovertible evidence of the escalation from instruction to criminal assault. Expert testimony from military psychologists and training specialists established that Blackwood's behavior had deviated far beyond acceptable parameters for challenging military instruction, crossing clear boundaries into personal violence motivated by wounded pride rather than educational objectives. The pattern of escalating aggression demonstrated through witness testimony revealed systemic abuse of authority that had been building over months of increasingly inappropriate training methods. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez provided detailed testimony about the assault while maintaining operational security regarding classified aspects of her intelligence assignment that couldn't be disclosed even within the context of court-martial proceedings. Her professional composure and clear recollection of events provided compelling evidence of criminal intent, while demonstrating the kind of resilience and dedication that had enabled her to maintain deep cover for 18 months. Master Sergeant Blackwood's assault was unprovoked and excessive. She testified with calm authority that commanded attention throughout the courtroom. His actions violated every principle of military training and professional conduct, endangering personnel safety while compromising operations that had required years of preparation and coordination at the highest levels of military intelligence. The defense, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, attempted to argue that Blackwood's actions, while inappropriate, had been motivated by legitimate training objectives rather than criminal intent. However, the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and escalating violence made such arguments untenable in the face of documented medical trauma and witness testimony that clearly established assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. Character witnesses called by the defense painted a picture of a decorated non-commissioned officer whose 15-year career had included multiple commendations and successful training programs that had prepared thousands of soldiers for operational deployment. However, testimony also revealed a pattern of increasingly harsh methods and concerning incidents that had been overlooked due to his reputation and the results his programs achieved. The military panel, composed of senior officers with extensive experience in training operations and personnel management, deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning verdicts that reflected the severity of Blackwood's crimes and their implications for military discipline. The unanimous guilty findings on all charges demonstrated clear recognition that assault on any soldier, regardless of apparent rank, violated fundamental military values that demanded protection and respect for all personnel. Colonel Hawkins delivered the sentence with appropriate gravity that reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and their broader implications for military justice and operational security. Former Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood, this court sentences you to reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, confinement for 24 months at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, and dismissal from military service with dishonorable discharge. The severity of the sentence sent shock waves through the non-commissioned officer community throughout the military, establishing clear precedent that assault on any soldier would result in career-ending consequences regardless of the perpetrator's rank, experience, or previous service record. The case became required study material for leadership training programs, emphasizing the absolute nature of professional standards and legal obligations that governed military conduct. Additional administrative actions taken against Blackwood included permanent loss of military benefits, revocation of security clearances, and lifetime prohibition from employment in any capacity related to national security or defense contracting. The comprehensive nature of consequences reflected determination to ensure that his criminal behavior would have lasting personal ramifications while serving as deterrent to others who might consider similar abuse of authority. The proceedings had also resulted in systematic review of training protocols throughout Camp Steelridge and other facilities, leading to enhanced oversight procedures and mandatory reporting requirements designed to prevent future incidents of instructor abuse. The military's commitment to protecting all personnel had been strengthened through formal recognition that anyone in uniform might be operating under orders that required additional consideration and protection from those in positions of authority. 18 months after the incident at Training Sector Delta, the reverberations of Lieutenant Colonel Emma Rodriguez's exposed identity continued to reshape military training protocols and intelligence operations across multiple installations throughout the United States and overseas facilities. The comprehensive after-action report she submitted following her extraction had identified 23 critical security vulnerabilities in standard personnel processing procedures, leading to systematic overhauls of counterintelligence measures and operational security protocols that extended far beyond the original scope of Operation Mountain Shadow. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had returned to her primary assignment with Army Intelligence and Security Command, but her 18 months of deep cover work had provided insights that transformed the military's understanding of internal security, threats, and the sophisticated methods required to detect potential infiltration by hostile intelligence services. Her detailed analysis of how classified personnel could operate undetected within regular military units had become essential reading for senior officers responsible for counterintelligence operations throughout the Department of Defense. The intelligence community had implemented her recommendations for improved security screening procedures at training facilities worldwide, recognizing that the ease with which she had maintained her cover identity revealed fundamental weaknesses in personnel monitoring, systems that could be exploited by foreign operatives seeking to compromise military operations, enhanced background verification procedures, advanced biometric monitoring systems, and sophisticated behavioral analysis. Protocols had been deployed to facilities conducting sensitive training programs. Camp Steelridge itself had undergone extensive reorganization following the security review, triggered by Rodriguez's blown cover operation. General Harrison had implemented comprehensive reforms of instructor oversight procedures, mandatory reporting requirements for training incidents, and enhanced psychological evaluation programs designed to identify personnel whose behavior might compromise operational security or endanger soldier safety through abuse of authority. Facilities' reputation within military circles had actually been enhanced rather than damaged by its role in exposing critical security vulnerabilities, earning recognition from Pentagon officials for contributing to improved operational security measures that protected ongoing intelligence operations. The base had become a model for implementing enhanced training protocols that balanced rigorous preparation with appropriate respect for personnel dignity and legal rights. The broader military community had absorbed lessons from the Rodriguez case that extended well beyond intelligence operations and training security. The revelation that a lieutenant colonel had operated successfully under deep cover for 18 months, while forming genuine relationships with fellow soldiers, had prompted fundamental questions about trust, authenticity, and the human costs of intelligence work that required extended deception of colleagues and friends. Leadership development programs throughout the military now incorporated case studies based on Rodriguez's experience, emphasizing the critical importance of treating all personnel with appropriate respect, regardless of apparent rank, background, or assignment status. The principle that anyone in uniform might be operating under classified orders that required protection had been formally integrated into command training curricula and military justice education programs. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez had found her transition back to regular intelligence duties complicated by the professional recognition that accompanied her successful deep cover operation, leading to assignment as the primary architect of a revolutionary new training program designed to prepare intelligence officers for extended undercover missions within military units. Her unique experience had made her one of the military's most valuable assets for understanding the psychological challenges and operational requirements of long-term identity deception. The personal toll of maintaining false identity for 18 months while genuinely caring for the welfare of fellow soldiers had required extensive counseling and psychological support that revealed important insights about the human cost of intelligence operations. Rodriguez had formed authentic friendships during her time as Corporal Emma Rodriguez, relationships that had to be carefully managed to protect both operational security and the emotional well-being of personnel who had unknowingly participated in her cover assignment. The most challenging aspect wasn't maintaining operational security, or remembering cover story details. Rodriguez had explained during classified debriefing sessions. It was developing real emotional connections with people who trusted me completely, while knowing that my entire identity was fabricated for intelligence purposes. Every friendship felt simultaneously genuine and fundamentally dishonest, creating psychological stress that exists in training programs hadn't adequately prepared me to handle. Her recommendations for future deep cover operations had emphasized the need for enhanced psychological preparation and ongoing mental health support for operatives conducting long-term identity deception, as well as improved protocols for managing the personal relationships that inevitably developed during extended assignments. The military's understanding of intelligence work's emotional demands had been significantly advanced by her detailed analysis of the psychological challenges inherent in deep cover operations. Former Master Sergeant Ryan Blackwood remained incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, serving his 24-month sentence while participating in mandatory counseling programs designed to address the anger management issues and alcohol dependency that had contributed to his criminal behavior. His case had become a cautionary tale within military justice education, demonstrating how personal problems and unchecked authority could combine to destroy careers and compromise national security operations. Military training facilities worldwide now displayed Rodriguez's story as an example of the hidden depths that could exist within any unit, ensuring that instructors and commanders maintained awareness that exceptional capability and classified purpose might be concealed beneath ordinary appearances. The principle that every soldier deserved professional treatment regardless of apparent status had been reinforced through formal recognition that assumptions about personnel backgrounds could be fundamentally incorrect. As new recruits continued arriving at Camp Steelridge and other training facilities, their instructors carried knowledge that anyone in formation might be operating under orders that required careful protection of their true identity and mission. The lasting legacy of Operation Mountain Shadow extended beyond improved security procedures to encompass renewed appreciation for the complexity and dedication required for military service at all levels, ensuring that respect and professionalism remained constant regardless of apparent rank or assignment status. Story of the quiet recruit who had been revealed as an intelligence lieutenant colonel conducting classified assessments had become part of military folklore, a reminder that the most important qualities of military service could be found at any level of the hierarchy, and that true leadership meant protecting and respecting every person who chose to serve their country in uniform. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.